Anyone who's watched me over the years knows that I'm obsessed with Hydrolyte. In my opinion, the best oral rehydration product on the market. I literally use it every day. My family uses it. When I had COVID, I'm telling you, Hydrolyte contributed to my recovery, kept me hydrated. Now, with things finally reopening back around the country, the potential exposure to the common cold is always around. And like always, Hydrolyte has got your back. Hydrolyte Plus Immunity, my new favorite, starts with their fast-absorbing electrolytes and adds a host of great ingredients. Plus, each single serving easy pour drink mix contains 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, 300 milligrams of elderberry extract. Hydrolyte Plus Immunity comes in convenient, easy to pour sticks that rapidly dissolve in water, make a great tasting drink, has 75% less sugar than your typical sports drink. Uses all natural flavors, gluten-free, dairy-free, caffeine-free, non-GMO, and even vegan. Hydrolyte Plus Immunity is also now available in ready-to-drink bottles at the Walmart next to the pharmacy, or as always, you can find it by visiting hydrolyte.com/Dr. Drew. Again, that is HYDRALYTE.com/DRDREW. Be sure to use the code Dr. Drew 25 for a special discount.
Hello, everyone. It's a dose of Dr. Drew.
It is indeed. And we have to my, let's see, your right, my left. No, my left, your right. Dr. Kelly Victory is here with me. It is a pleasure to have her back after a long down period. And those of you that watch our stream know that Dr. Kelly Victory has helped us navigate this pandemic since early on. And though you and I have disagreed on a few things, I thought the important thing that you and I maintained was active discourse, which is the one thing that was missing from this whole pandemic. Right. And it seems like it's coming back. Doesn't it feel like you can start to talk again a little bit?
Well, yeah, absolutely, Drew. And it's really a breath of fresh air because, as I said, you know, we have disagreed on some things, and I disagree with many of my colleagues throughout the pandemic. But the important part is that we're able
throughout our careers. That's part of what we do. We disagree and we share ideas and we go back and forth. That's why there's such a thing as consultation. We want to see if we're right, see if somebody disagrees.
This is not an anomaly to medicine either.
Right. Keep going.
This is something that, you know, what makes a good boardroom, what makes a good relationship, what makes a good society is all of this is that you have people who argue with you, tell you why that's a bad idea, what part you're missing, where your blind spots are. The idea that I think part of the way this pandemic has really gone wrong is that we ended up with one or two or at most three iconic leaders, quote unquote, Anthony Fauci being the primary one, who was really unquestioned, and you were considered to be really some sort of a heretic if you did question it, and you were shut down if you offered alternate viewpoints or alternate theories about things. And I think that's a very dangerous thing in any situation, whether it's a company, a family, a society, or, you know, and certainly when you're trying to deal with a global pandemic.
Right. And you know, you and I always started from the premise that seems to have been missed by everybody throughout much of this, which is that pandemics suck. They suck. People die. That's what makes a pandemic is excess death. They suck. They blow. This was a bad one. And it was going to suck no matter what we did. And I think we sort of, particularly in this country, I mean, the overall arc of what we did was not so bad if you really look at it, especially given the fact that if you're a vaccine enthusiast, we kind of saved the world. But we'll talk about vaccines in a minute. But let's go back to Dr. Fauci. Let's imagine a world where there wasn't a press that was demanding certain actions, essentially a press that was demanding the government behave like the Chinese Communist Party did in Wuhan. There wasn't a state like California that ran to the other side of the boat when the federal government said do one thing, California ran to the other side of the boat. What if there was a general sort of willingness to listen to the CDC and listen to Dr. Fauci? Isn't it possible that he could have led us through this, even with his excesses? You know what I mean? Is it possible he could have led us through this reasonably well? Because he never said close schools. He never said close businesses. You know, his excesses were sort of essentially things that piled on to things that were already happening in the States.
Right. And the problem, as you said, pandemics are already, you're talking about a major, major
Hmm.
crisis. This one, not just national, but global.
Hmm.
We know that we are already going to be facing huge healthcare issues. On top of that, you layer in all the psychosocial and economic devastation that
Right.
adds on, the national security issues. It became, I mean, it's a multifaceted, multi-layered issue. And so, frankly, I think we would have benefited, Drew, from really parsing out those individual pieces,
Mm.
acknowledging that this isn't just a healthcare issue. It
Right.
began as a healthcare issue. The origin is a virus, but we would have done better, I think, to have appointed multiple task forces, somebody to deal with the actual viral spread component, somebody to deal with the economic fallout, somebody to deal with how are we going to manage international affairs or international relationships during
Hmm.
this. How, in other words, this is not just a pandemic, is way more complex than putting one person
Yeah.
on a pedestal and
Yeah.
saying, great, you're our go-to guy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that would have been good, but I just to push back a tiny bit, there would not have been so much economic fallout, mental health fallout, international fallout, if we had just listened to infectious disease and epidemiologists and not governors and press and the New York Times editorial board and all the extraordinary excesses that were demanded of governors and governments that harmed people immensely during this whole thing.
Because you are absolutely correct, and the reason, Drew, is that people failed on the primary mandate in public health, which is that we need to look at not simply a single disease process, in this case COVID-19, but in the ramifications and the fallout for the health of the entire population. And that health is not just physical health. It
Right.
is economic health, spiritual health, psychological health. And so, unfortunately, the be all end all became for somebody, say, like a governor who has no training in public health. For them, the entire focus was stop COVID.
Which is weird.
Stop COVID.
Which was bizarre.
No,
and we had
that cannot.
Yeah, and we had sociologists.
Cannot be.
Look, at our public health director.
That can't be it. In public health, you've got to say stop COVID while mitigating the downstream impact on the entire rest of the population.
Which is the same thing the same charge that you and I have as clinicians of a given individual's, a given patient, which is do no harm. Do no harm,
Right.
or at least balance the harm and do optimum good. And I don't,
Right.
we had a sociologist heading up our public health department here in Los Angeles who seemed completely incapable of making the kinds of decisions that were necessary here, and was
Correct.
extremely heavy-handed and ruined people's lives if they dared to push back. And that was, anyway. But I do like the idea.
Amended, by the way.
Yeah, I do like the idea of a panel. I think you're right that as we look back at this, that might be a nice model for dealing with these things in the future, and not just having. I like the idea more of less having independent councils so much as independent committees that come together as a big council and share ideas. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, where you have people whose job is to really consider, for example, the economic impact. That doesn't mean that we're going to follow everything that person says, because it has to be weighed against all the other considerations.
Right.
But to have someone whose real focus is, wow, if we do that, what are we likely to see in terms of economic fallout? Or if we do close schools, what are we likely going to see as the impact on children, independent of the impact on the virus?
I mean,
what will the impact specifically on the health and welfare of children be? And if we had done that, I think we would have had a far more balanced, more measured, more sensible approach to this than that absolute blinders, tunnel vision of stop COVID.
Yeah, and well, it even got weirder, and I heard other physicians saying one death is too many. And yeah, we
right.
prefer this not to be a pandemic. We prefer it. One death is too many, but we're in a pandemic, and pandemics are defined by excess death. Otherwise, we're not in a pandemic.
Correct.
So to say one death is too many is to say, well, magically we're not in a pandemic anymore. So as we look back, I'm thinking about, panels and committees and things. boy, I sure would like a committee to look at the excesses of the press, because the government seemed to respond to really irresponsible meddling by the press, and pushing of narratives rather than reporting the news. Case one would be how they handled the potential of a viral outbreak from the lab in Wuhan. Anyone that wanted to look at it, discuss it, write about it, report on it was canceled. What are you thinking about that in retrospect? Kelly, can you hear me okay? Susan, I think Dr. Victor.
I'm intermittently.
Yeah. So I was just saying, thoughts on the way the press.
Are you there?
I'm here. Susan.
I can hear you.
Okay. Do you see me? I hear you.
My internet connection is apparently very unstable here.
Okay, it's good.
We just got to the juicy stuff too.
It's good. You're coming at us well. So if you can understand me, just go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Did you hear what I said?
Well, with regard to this, yes, I did. And absolutely, the censorship started at the very beginning, the shutting down of any alternative narratives, whether it was the origins of the virus, whether, coming from the lab in Wuhan, and then went down the line to questioning the veracity of mask wearing or social distancing and all the rest of it.
Early therapeutics.
But if you go back to that, exactly. And if you start, though, with the idea that the lab theory, as they called it, I was one of the people who very, very early on the basis of the actual virology that we were seeing, and this was, I became aware of it on the 17th of February of last year, 17 February 2020, and I said, there is no question in my mind, after reading all the scientific data, that this was not a naturally occurring virus. It clearly was lab manipulated. I said, I have no idea how it got out. I'm simply telling you, this did not emanate from a wet market, as we have been told. For saying that, I was absolutely lambasted in the press. I was shut down from all social media. I was labeled an, Alex Jones level conspiracy theorist, a right-wing nut job. People said I must be a leader of QAnon. I mean, it went on and on and on. That is a very dangerous place to be, Drew. And you and I have talked about the fact that there are these, 20-something-year-old fact checkers, quote unquote, at Twitter or Facebook, who are in a position to censor what you and I say from a scientific perspective. Now, you can disagree with me all day long. You can think I'm not a very bright person. You can say you don't respect the academic institutions that I went to or the degrees that I have. But the idea that you can simply say, you may not speak, we are going to eliminate that thought or that train of thought or that alternative narrative is a very, very dangerous place to be. And now, frankly, I don't take any huge joy in being right about this. But the bottom line is, now we are finding out that many, many, many of the things that I and others said from the very beginning turn out that they are true. They are exactly true. And we're finding that out from the emails that are coming out. And it's everything from the actual...
Of course, all the people that skewered you, I'm sure, have apologized and have reimbursed you for the lost income as a result of lost jobs and lost hours of wages.
Yes.
I'm certain that was the case. Yeah.
Yes, I was camping out by my mailbox just this morning, Drew, waiting for the letters to arrive, the apologies to arrive. Alas, they did not come before I had to leave for work.
I think
so,
these things.
No, I believe
I think these things are going to get worked out in the courts. I really do. I think people are going to be held accountable for the damage they have done to people who were just offering an opinion based on years of training. I mean. People can dismiss opinions. Yes. That's fine. I mean, that's all right. Or you can argue against them. I mean, I by the way, there's some of the stuff. By the way, some of the stuff in the email from Fauci. We haven't yet talked about the emails, but some of them were kind of interesting in terms of his assessment of whether or not the virus was from the Wuhan lab. But it wasn't a completely conspiratorial idea. He was looking at some of the science and said some ideas about some of the sequences of the genetics of the virus. I thought that was interesting, but it wasn't, out of hand, this is impossible. It's like, I don't think so. I'm looking at this, maybe not. And that's how we should have been talking about it the entire time. Whether you came down to the side of yes for sure or I'm not so sure, it's a viable question. And in the meantime, 1 year has been spent trying to find.
But there are other pieces of the email.
Well, we'll get to them. I just want to say that they're no, it's all right. We're all good.
My internet is just
you're clear.
Here.
I want you to know whatever you're saying about me, you are clear as a bell. So there's not been no interruption in your feed. So you can just interrupt me anytime and just keep going. It's all good.
Oh, good. So it's all in
it's all in your head.
Okay.
But I just want to say that in the go ahead.
Was to say that there are other parts, however, of that emails about the origins of the virus, Drew, where it makes it pretty darn clear that Fauci knew. For example, he just testified in Congress in the last week and a half in front of people like Rand Paul and Senator Kennedy and others, Lindsey Graham, where he absolutely denied that we were involved or that the lab in Wuhan was involved in this gain of function research. Yet there are emails where Anthony Fauci has attached documents called gain of function coronavirus.pdf.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, if you want to deny that you are involved or are aware of gain of function research on coronaviruses, you probably ought not have a document called gain of function and coronaviruses.pdf that you are sending out.
Do we have a Kelly Strikes Back?
Because it really does leave a paper trail that is going to be difficult.
There it is. Oh, it's a Drew Strikes Back, but it should be a Kelly Strikes Back. But yeah, I completely.
But it's going to be tough.
I completely agree with you, and it's clear. Look, they got some explaining to do, and they're trying not to do it. It's clear that gain of function research was underway. It's clear that the NIH was involved with it. They need to. Maybe there's some the best case scenario is there's some national security reason they don't want to talk about the details. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is you can't handle it. We don't want to tell you because you can't handle it. That's bullshit. And that's generally been the attitude of our government for the entire pandemic. We have to lie to you and distort and go and give excessive positions in one way or the other because you can't handle the facts.
Well, you know what, Drew, again, I would go back to this did not begin with COVID. And I've made the point recently that it's generally not the act that gets people in trouble. It's the cover up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So think back to Bush going after the weapons of mass destruction in Afghanistan and people saying, why are you leading us into this war on a goose chase? If Bush had been honest and said, we know they have weapons of mass destruction because we sold them to them. And and here's why we did it. We thought it was a good idea at the time. Turns out it was a really, really bad idea, but now we got to go get them back. That would have been a hard thing for the American public to hear, but it's the truth. And frankly, people would have rallied around behind it. Likewise, I believe if Anthony Fauci had come clean and said, we were involved in gain of function research and in funding it at that lab in Wuhan. We thought it made sense. We thought it was worth the risk. We thought it was important to do. Turns out it was a really, really bad idea.
Yep.
And now we've got to make it right.
Yeah.
It's the cover up that leads people into far more hot water and really devastation than the act itself. Especially
when we need to be able to trust our institutions, particularly institutions like the CDC. And if they, you know, I would just argue maybe they're not used to dealing in the age of social media, or I don't know what their strategies were, but this was really not good form. And you can see it.
And you wonder, it's hard for me to imagine, Drew, you're exactly right, how they wouldn't have known, and certainly how Anthony Fauci wouldn't have anticipated that his personal emails could ultimately get out. So when you think about something more simple, less sinister, say, than the origins of the virus, take something as simple as masks. He knows that there's been great controversy about it. He's been an absolute zealot about masks and how important it is to wear masks, and maybe even more than one mask. If one is good, two is better, and that you should keep wearing masks even after you're vaccinated. Yet his personal emails belie something very, very different. There are emails where he clearly says to in exchanges with friends, don't bother wearing a mask. They do nothing to stop the spread of respiratory viruses. It's in his emails. Don't buy those masks at the drugstore. They don't do anything. They actually can make things worse. I mean, these emails are out there, and it really makes one wonder, and perhaps it's a factor of his age, that it didn't occur to him that his personal emails might come to light and might really expose that what he was saying in private was very, very different from what he was telling the American people.
But does that surprise you? Are you surprised? I that makes perfect sense to me that he was doing that. The problem, what I want to know is, why was he doing that? You know, what was his motivation? What are you doing?
Right. And that really is the question, because you're saying the American people have suffered mercilessly for 15 months. You know, my background is disasters. I have been present and participant in the responses to some really horrific scenes in this country. You know, I was on site. I ran a MASH unit for weeks after Katrina. I was there in Joplin after the floods. I went to Haiti after the earthquakes. I've been in some pretty heinous spots. And I will tell you, the American people are as selfless as they come. They are incredibly giving, incredibly generous, incredibly willing to sacrifice, even for people they don't know. But when they find out that they have been duped, when they find out that somebody asked them to sacrifice, to suffer, to give to others, or to give up certain luxuries or civil liberties for nothing, to wear a mask, for months at end, to socially distance, to not attend church, to not go to a wedding or to a graduation or a funeral, all of these things, only to find out that the leader, the person telling them to do that, doesn't fundamentally believe himself that social distancing or mask wearing made any difference at all. That's really a hard thing for people to hear. If you missed your parents' funeral, or you missed a pivotal social event with an aging parent or grandparent, finding out that Anthony Fauci himself didn't think that made any difference is a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, but to be fair, again, to push back a little bit again, they had nothing else to offer, and they should have been much. They should not have been adding to the misery and the consequences. That's the problem. They made things worse. And again, it wasn't so much Fauci and those guys. It was the governors and some of the states that took these aggressive actions that ruined people's lives on top of the misery of the pandemic.
I don't think the masks were, they weren't a bad idea for the everybody.
So let's talk about the data. The only data that showed efficacy of the mask was the Danish study that was published in the New England Journal, and it showed about a 15% efficacy.
I think it was more closing down restaurants and not being able to eat outside, and like closing down venues, making kids stop.
Zero evidence that closing down schools. Most countries did. The longest school shutdown in other countries was something like 60 days, I think.
Texas opened up and nothing happened.
So hold on. So school lockdowns didn't do anything. Masks, maybe 15%. But that 15%, social distancing did nothing. And the MIT study finally proved it, that there is no difference in transmission at 6 feet or 60 feet. So really what they should have been doing is saying
these things, I think, Susan, are additive. It's not one thing. If it was just wear a mask when you go to the grocery store, but it was the putting people, driving the entire American population, the entire, everyone into the basement of fear.
Yes,
into the,
that I agree with.
You can't do anything. We won't allow you any luxuries. We can't tell you when this will end. It was the additive.
It's still happening.
The additive nature of
the
that.
virtue signaling in Pasadena
it's
is
how you treat
ridiculous.
Prisoners of war. You take away everything until they are so miserable. They are so desperate that they essentially will do anything you say if you will just make it stop. It is still happening. California doesn't open until June 15th, that very special magical day that that when apparently Gavin Newsom knows that things are going to become less severe. It isn't based on a lick of science. And I find that very problematic when you're continuing to have such a profound impact on people and their civil liberties.
I understand you guys' feelings about this.
I agree, but I agree with Kelly on so many things.
Susan, you're going to have to listen.
Okay.
You have to listen and then speak. You have to. I insist.
Now
I'm
more on the fence.
I know you're excited about this. I get it, but
I know I can't help it.
You got to take turns. So I've been a mask advocate from the beginning because it didn't hurt anything. Although I understand the feelings about it, I felt that even if it was a 15% on the margin, we certainly did not wear masks when we were caring for patients, right? And we wore masks and we wore N95s. We had different there was a different situation to be sure. But it's not like we were heedless with masks in that's the dog. Yeah. So hold on. We had a mic accident.
Well, I'm having internet issues, but I will tell you, I would say that the mask wearing, Drew,
completely fell apart.
The issue with the masks is that they aren't, the masks are not insignificant or not, it's not just an inconvenience. I think they actually have a lot of negatives.
No, I know you said that, and we've talked about that, and we've worried about.
Wait, I lost you entirely now.
Oh boy. I know we've talked, we've had those conversations, and you've turned out to be more right than me, for sure, in terms of social interaction with young people, social development, in terms of impetigo and fungus around the mouth, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I for sure. You have ended up being more right than I have, but let me go back to where I was sort of heading, which was the issue of the potential of the virus having been let go from the lab or escape from the lab. Let's just assume escape. Let's use it only from the idea of escape. There's evidence that they were handling coronavirus, that they were looking at particularly this particular spike protein binding to the ACE receptor and the way this particular virus does. They were doing research on exactly that. Why, we don't really know. It'd be nice if they would tell us that. And they didn't use level 4. They used level 2 safety criteria when they should have been using level 4. So there's plenty of opportunity.
Lost you.
It's all right. And there's been a 1-year search, through the zoonotic spectrum to try to find evidence of the virus moving through animal vectors. And there is zero evidence of that, and growing evidence on the lab side. So there we are. The question is, what do we do about the fact that no conversation was allowed about this and people were harmed for even bringing up the topic? Do you have any feelings about that?
Well, I think I missed part of what you're saying because my darn internet's cutting out here. But the issue, I think, if you're asking about them again shutting down the conversation about where the virus emanated from, I think yes, it was a critical issue, and people were shut down. But the first story that I read about it, I think, came from Mediaite, and they were shut down off of all social media platforms in perpetuity following that story. And as you said, as you know, I was shut down as well for even talking about it. Mm-hmm. I think it's very important what's happened. Interestingly, last week, when it became clear that Fauci's emails were going to be released and that the American public at large was going to become more aware of the fact that, in fact, the virus did come from a lab in Wuhan. It's generally accepted now that that's what happened. So they floated out Zeke Emanuel to say, it doesn't matter. That's just, let's move on. That's not important anymore. We don't need to look at it. And I looked at that as sort of the consummate Hillary Clinton, what difference does it make statement. To say that what Zeke Emanuel said last week was, it doesn't really matter where the virus came from because it wouldn't change how we managed it, how we address it. Now, where he is fundamentally or functionally correct, the origin doesn't change the pandemic response, I would submit to you it's very, very important to know. That's like saying somebody launches a nuclear missile at you, that it doesn't matter where the missile came from because it doesn't change how we respond. Well, you're right. There is the response to the disaster, but you better believe it's important where that missile came from. And we need to figure it out so it doesn't happen again.
Right. That's all.
I have no information as to whether or not it was launched purposefully or if it was a matter of abject incompetence. I suspect it was the latter, frankly.
Yeah, me too.
There's no question that they were working on gain of function, which is fundamentally a weaponization of a pathogen. But this isn't the first leak or first accident that has come out of that virology lab. They've had other issues where they were not up to snuff on their security and safety measures. So I suspect this was more an accident than anything else.
Yeah.
But again, it's the cover up that really gets you into trouble.
Well, I don't even mind the cover up. I mind that people's ability to have their essentially their First Amendment rights were crushed, and they were slandered and libeled without any recourse. And that's not fair. It's not fair. And it wasn't good for the whole process and all this. So did you have any concerns about the way the Chinese?
Well, as you know, I not only was. I'm sorry. I know I keep cutting you off. It's because I'm not getting your feed, so I apologize for that. But I was not only slandered and libeled. I had multiple complaints ledgered against my medical licenses in multiple states, and spent unbelievable amounts of money and time defending myself. Fortunately, I was able to do that. And each time the board said, this is ridiculous and we understand, and they just dismissed the case. But to the tune of, countless hours of my time that I was not able to spend either A, treating patients, or B, living my life, doing the other things I want to do, because I needed to continue to respond to fallacious complaints against my medical license, because I was saying things like, I think this virus very clearly emanated from a virology lab in Wuhan, not from the wet market.
Did the way the Chinese government responded to the initial outbreak concern you? That was one of my original concerns, was that it looked either like a rehearsal, like they'd rehearsed it. I mean, think about it. There were tankers running down the streets, spraying chlorine everywhere. That didn't make any sense at all to me. It was something that they were just, as though that they were locked and loaded to do that should something escape, or they were trying to hide something. That's what it looked like to me. And then when the press started demanding that every government on earth behave the same way, I thought, this is bizarre. It's going to be a disaster. But what do you think?
Well, one of the things you have to know, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in China. And unfortunately, one of the things, it's a lovely culture. One of the things you have to know is that you really can't trust anything that comes out of the Chinese government. They are absolutely the consummate propagandists. They really rival the Russians in their ability to do that, and to not only censor and filter the information that comes out, but to be ready to put their spin on it, so that you better believe they had a story ready to go, and really locked and loaded and ready to send out there if anything happened at that virology lab. Much of the footage that you may remember seeing of people dropping dead in the streets and people tipping over, and them, fumigating city blocks.
Yeah, that was bizarre.
Shenzhen and places like, right. And who the heck, it's much of it was likely theater. So you simply don't know. And that's part of the reason we need to do, I believe, really an international deep dive into how this pandemic started, and really get to the bottom of it. It clearly didn't just impact the United States. So I think it would be unwise to have it be just a U.S. investigation. I think we need international buy-in to look at what happened and how do we keep this from happening again.
Right. I think that's and how to do it better. And I like your idea of sort of committees and that kind of thing. I think that's would be a significant improvement. All right. So well,
I think the Biden administration's open to that now, right?
I don't know. I don't know. They don't seem to be looking at this. I think there needs to be some sort of post-mortem, first of all, to look at where things were done wrong. And I don't know that that's going to happen. I just, we have to learn from this, and it's inconvenient to hold people accountable for some of the things that they have done. Maybe they could make a case that they did it with good intent.
For national security reasons.
Yeah, national security reasons, or trying to maintain a health maintenance, message, making sure that everyone is saying the same thing, even though it's not totally
right.
Substantiated. I don't know.
Well, we seem to get it under control faster than other countries, so we have to kind of pat ourselves on the back for that.
Well, the Biden administration, unfortunately, the reason I worry, Susan, that they will not really approach this with open, arms, is that the initial investigation, they put people like Peter Daszak, who is the CEO of EcoHealth. He was the CEO of the company that got the grant from the NIH to do the gain of function research. And he was one of the people who was involved in the investigation of what went on and how the virus escaped, or whether it escaped from the lab. So, that's the proverbial, the fox guarding the hen house. You cannot have people involved in the investigation who specifically have a reason to try to cover up what happened. Both Peter Daszak as well as, frankly, Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci had to probably, really has got to be thinking, wow, I may have funded the development of a pathogen that created the worst pandemic in recorded history. That resulted in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people around the globe. I mean, this is a pretty serious issue. And there are many people, unfortunately, really, who are calling this a crime against humanity. There are people who are talking about Nuremberg type trials happening again, because it wasn't simply one lie. It wasn't simply a lie about where the virus originated. It was an active effort to suppress early therapeutics. Because let's face it, the only way you could have the vaccines through is if you, under the emergency use authorization, is if you absolutely denied and suppressed the idea that there were other treatment options out there.
Well, this gets a little murky for me. I completely agree with you that early interventions were not properly studied and not properly looked after. Whether it's fluvoxamine, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, even steroids, was all very unclear. Monoclonal antibodies had a very clear efficacy, and they were used. Good. There's a new antiviral coming that's an oral antiviral that should be here hopefully by the fall, that will make all these conversations sort of moot at that point. But in the meantime, there are things we could be doing, and you and I have both seen people do it to great efficacy. Way more physicians were doing these things than people understand. They were particularly for their family and themselves and other people, because they were looking for ways to help on the margins. I am a strong vaccine advocate. I think the risk reward on the vaccine is clearly, from my perspective, in favor of the vaccine. We have 150 million vaccinated people, and we have on the order of thousands of serious adverse events, which is very tiny compared to potentially the risk of COVID, at least in the risk populations. So, but what I'm concerned about is, and you, Kelly, tell me if you're with me on these two things. People who've had COVID pretty clearly now don't need the vaccine. There's adequate evidence right now that they don't need the vaccine. So requiring people that have had COVID, requiring that is requiring unnecessary medical procedures, which is considered, gross medical mismanagement. If you and I did unnecessary medical procedures, we would be looking at not just malpractice, but criminal action. So we're demanding, and I took the vaccine, I had the COVID, and I didn't need it, and I had a bad reaction. Could have been serious. It wasn't, thank goodness, but okay, so I took the vaccine. But that was an unnecessary medical procedure for me, number one. And then the other part that I'm concerned about with the vaccine therapies is that we're not giving people, we're supposed to be using informed consent. None of us are interested in mandating or governments requiring treatment, but I do believe in motivating the vaccines. But we're not really giving people informed consent because we're obfuscating a lot of the data. And those two things, the unnecessary medical procedures and obfuscation of consent, really bother me, even though I'm a strong vaccine advocate. So I think the only argument is that these people are doing this obfuscation because they believe the vaccines are so important that it's worth being unethical or something. I mean, what would the argument be?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Well, because mass vaccination has become an end in and of itself, Drew, I agree with you. Number one, there is not a single study or a shred of evidence that people who are COVID recovered stand to gain anything by being vaccinated. And instead, the studies are mounting that people who are COVID recovered who get vaccinated have a much higher incidence of adverse events. They are the people clearly who are more likely to have an adverse event. And the studies are becoming very clear. One just now out of Israel, the Thornton study on top of it. There are mounting evidence and no reason to believe that COVID recovered people need the vaccine. Their immunity is broad, robust, and enduring.
Mm-hmm.
When you get a vaccine, you develop antibodies to a very specific thing, that single spike protein, which was the basis for the vaccine.
Right.
In contradistinction, when you have and recover from the virus, you develop immunity to all of the components of that virus, not just a single spike protein, but to all of the components of the virus. And therefore, people who have natural immunity have much broader immunity, meaning they are far more likely to be able to fend off a variant when it comes down the pike because they developed immunity to all of the components. We know from studies of the people who had and recovered from SARS-CoV-1 back in 2003 and 2004, those people still have existing antibodies, T-cell immunity, humoral immunity today, 17 years later. So we have every reason to believe that COVID recovered people have broad, enduring, robust immunity and don't need the vaccine. With regard to this informed consent, I don't think there could be a more critical issue on the table. Informed consent is a fundamental concept of medicine. There is absolutely no way that people are getting informed consent when they roll up to a drive-through window at the Walgreens and a technician gives them a shot in their arm. When I tell people, I respect absolutely anyone's decision to get this vaccine,
Mm-hmm.
if you've made the decision that it's in your best interest, but understand that you are a subject in an ongoing vaccine trial. That's a fact. These are ongoing trials. You are a subject in a vaccine trial. You have waived, whether you know it or not, whether you read the thing or not, you have waived all rights. You have indemnified everyone from the vaccine manufacturer to the place that gave it. You have absolutely zero legal recourse if you have a bad reaction. There's no one to sue. No one is going to pay you, even if you end up with death as your adverse event. When we look at other vaccine trials, Drew,
Mm-hmm.
generally the cutoff to pull a trial is somewhere in the range of 25 to 50 associated deaths. The swine flu vaccine back in 1976 was pulled after 25 associated deaths. We are at 4,500 deaths in the United States since January on days 1, 2, and 3 following these vaccines. Now, I'm pro-vaccine. I'm a vaccine zealot. I have spoken and written prolifically about the importance of people getting vaccinated. One of the greatest successes of public health is the fact that we have eliminated and even eradicated certain things like polio and largely measles and other things because of effective vaccine programs. But these are vaccines that have been well vetted and where we have years and years of data. To have these 3 COVID vaccines out there with 4,500 associated deaths since the beginning of January of this year is unprecedented.
It's unprecedented.
And frankly,
however,
I'll
push back. The pushback is 150 million. The N is 150 million as opposed to 60,000.
but we're not talking, it would be one thing, Drew, if we were talking about, I would feel differently if we were talking about a virus like Ebola that has a mortality rate of, say, 48%.
Different issue.
And
I get it.
And
yep.
and where all people are at risk. Children, for example, are not saved, are not at low risk from Ebola, or young healthy people aren't. They are at just as much risk from Ebola as an elderly person. COVID is very different. So I think the issue with these vaccines is you have to apply a very specific calculus to the decision making.
Yes.
Somebody who's over the age of 65
right.
or who has underlying comorbidities.
Right.
For that person, I guarantee you, if my parents were still living in their 90s in a nursing home or with limited, I would absolutely have encouraged them to be vaccinated, because the potential for them to have a bad outcome from COVID is really quite high. On the other hand, people under the age of 18 getting vaccinated, why would we launch an experimental vaccine on a group of people whose risk of having any ill effect from COVID is de minimis, is near to zero as you can get?
Well,
why would we do that?
Well, I have an answer. The answer is that there's so much fear that viral replication is going to result in a serious mutation, a so-called variant, that becomes more problematic, and we go through this whole exercise again. So again, you can agree with it or disagree with it, but I think the philosophy is, or the intent is, let's suppress viral replication as vigorously as possible, even if it means putting some people at some risk that maybe aren't individually deriving the benefit. Now, even if you make that case, however, which I think is a good case, you still have to give everybody the information necessary to make their own informed consent. And that's the part, again, that's missing.
Well, it's right. So two things. Number one, people who are being vaccinated right now are being vaccinated for a variant that no longer exists. The Wuhan variant, I'm here to tell you, the Wuhan variant is gone. But the vaccines were created to treat the spike protein on the Wuhan variant. That one's gone. We aren't even seeing that one anymore. So people are being vaccinated to a very specific spike protein that isn't even circulating anymore. Now, with regard to this informed consent, again, Drew, people need, I understand that the state of North Carolina and in some places in California, they're talking about allowing children as young as 12 to make this decision without parental consent. Now, how in the world, please explain to me how in the world a 12-year-old child is in a position to make what could be a life-altering decision? Well, this defies everything we've. I find this absolutely unconscionable.
No, I don't disagree with what she's saying, and there's a lot of stuff that 14-year-olds are able to consent to. That it's like, what are we doing here, guys? But it's not unusual in this state.
They're not going to die from COVID. Why are they getting the vaccine?
Right.
You didn't listen to what I said,
no,
which
I know,
is to
because
suppress replication.
Right. But it's also because we've mentally made these kids so afraid of it that they say, okay, I'll get the vaccine, and
that's true.
They don't have an idea.
I think the important issue for people to understand is when we come up with a new therapy of any sort, I don't care if it's a new antibiotic, a new medication for high blood pressure, or a vaccine. If there are groups of people on whom that new therapy hasn't been tested, whether it's pregnant women, lactating women, people with autoimmune diseases, people with an allergy to this or that, if there's a group of people who has been eliminated from the testing on that antibiotic or that antihypertensive or that vaccine, we specifically do not use that medication or that treatment in those groups because it hasn't been tested on them.
That makes sense.
This
to me
is
too.
Unprecedented.
But it is
to take a vaccine that was never tested on these groups.
I get you. I hear you. No. I hear you. But again, it's back to the decision makers, not being transparent. They may be consciously putting people at risk for a greater intent. You know what I mean? They may be actively saying, we're going to have to push forward anyway because here's how we analyze the risk reward. But the thing we're both zeroing in on is people are then not understanding that they're taking the risk they're taking because the informed consent is obscured. And that's so
okay.
concerning.
So they're doing this. So when I look at this and I say, what for COVID-19? Why are we doing this here? Let's look at something like, there's been no talk about the fact that, if you look in LA County, only 50% of kids between the ages of 12 and 17, 50% have been vaccinated against meningitis.
Yeah.
Something which has a 20% mortality rate.
Yep.
And of the people who survive it, 20 to 25% lose a limb, lose an arm or a leg or both.
And or have a stroke or whatever.
Only 50% of kids in LA and in California in general are vaccinated against human papillomavirus.
Cancer
in
causing.
association with ovarian cancer, which has a 58%. Right. But instead, we're focusing on COVID-19, something which has a mortality rate of near zero for people under the age of 18. So I can't get my arms around why we are treating this so differently than everything else, why we are essentially allowing informed consent to go by the wayside, why we are giving this medication, this treatment, to people on whom it has not been tested. It is one thing to say, let's target people in those high risk groups, because for those people, the risks are worth it, because their risk of succumbing to COVID is so high. But for all the rest of the people, I agree. Again, it's anybody's choice to take it, but we darn sure should be making sure that they have informed consent, that they understand the risks.
That's right.
And when I hear people say, physicians commonly, that these are totally safe, I say, totally safe? These vaccines, not a one of them existed 13 months ago.
But
they did not exist.
To be fair, again,
so the longest period of time you could have any data on them is 13 months.
And to be fair, again, in the state of California, the great state of California, one thing we have done is vaccinated a lot of people. So 70% of the population here has had at least one vaccine. And it's not like we're seeing an inundation of adverse events. We're just not. They're there, they happen, but it's not, 70% of 30 million. So essentially 20 million people have been vaccinated, and we're seeing thousands of adverse events, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. And you could argue that, we need more time with this particular therapeutic and what, and in an ideal world, but we're dealing in a real-time situation. Though. And let me ask you
especially if they're young people and it's really sad.
These are hard.
It's very sad. And if you're a parent
one life
who
is
was
too many.
compelled, if you were a parent who was compelled, for example, to get your kid vaccinated so that he or she could go back and finish their college degree, or could participate in you're saying, my God, I cannot, my poor child has been out of school for a year and a half. I cannot keep them home from school. And I have to, if you did that and then your child got pericarditis or myocarditis
from the vaccine,
if your child then had from the vaccine, if your child now has, left-sided heart failure, a huge, myocarditis related issue. I mean, you would be devastated if your kid had a stroke, if your daughter ended up having a fertility issue. I mean, you would never forgive yourself when you'd say, wow, and the risk of actually having a bad effect from COVID was zero.
And to be fair, there was just I don't know if you saw, the New England Journal had a large study on 12 to 17-year-olds with the vaccine. And I looked at it very carefully. There were very rare side effects. Doesn't mean there couldn't be something down the road and stuff. It looked pretty good. So this is, but this conversation is what's important. This is what we're advocating for, is for people like you and me to be able to.
I don't think I would let my kids get vaccinated, but I lived through it, and Drew barely lived through it, and I'm really happy I got it. So I took the risk, but I knew I read the paperwork too.
One of our kids didn't get the vaccine.
Yeah, he had COVID.
I understand, and it's a rational decision for him.
Yeah.
And he's an adult. He has to make his own mind. And I was just looking at my score, my so-called Additic score, which is this measure of all these different antibodies I have. Oh my gosh, I have spike S1 protein, IgG, IgM, IgA. I have RBD, IgG, IgM, IgA. I have nuclear capsid protein. IgM and IgA and tons of neutralizing antibodies. I mean, I'm all over the place in terms of my humoral antibody response to COVID. And it did peak back up again. Do I have the post-vaccine one? It went back up again.
And again, that is likely, Drew.
Yeah. Likely?
Uh-oh.
Go ahead. Continue. She can just keep going. I'll get out of the way.
I know.
I've lost you.
We have you. We have you. We have you.
Speak to me, Kelly. Just tell us your point.
You can just keep going. If you think you're stepping on me, don't worry about it. I'll know what happened.
No, what I was going to say, Drew, is those unbelievably robust antibodies are likely a result of your native disease. The fact that you had a bad case, and there's a reason. I tell people, there's a reason that the CDC is asking people, COVID recovered people, to give convalescent plasma. They don't go to people who got vaccinated and ask for plasma. Okay.
Yeah.
They go, and this is again why people should understand that if you had COVID, you don't need to be vaccinated. There's a reason why they get convalescent plasma from COVID recovered people, because we're the people who have the really good immunity that they want. We have the really broad, robust immunity that is in our serum, in our plasma. So there's really no justification, I don't believe, for COVID recovered people to be getting vaccinated. You certainly can if you want to, but you should know that you actually run a significantly higher risk of having some of the side effects and having a rougher course of having the vaccine.
I had a bad time. I woke up after 2 days of fever and misery, and then woke up on day 2 with a spontaneous raccoon eye, which is
only Drew.
I'm convinced that there's a consumptive, and if you read again, today's New England Journal showed that there is evidence of a consumptive thrombocytopenic process mediated by the, I think it's called PD4 mechanism that we see with heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. The exact same mechanism is at play here. And so I suspect it happens on a low level with a lot of people. And then some people it actually becomes more fulminant.
So Drew, there's a good question here. Mackay Smith at T. We are telling you that kids do not need to be vaccinated, and who do you think you are telling the lady guest of Drew's not to tell you such a thing?
I don't understand.
Well, she's just saying that we're telling you that you don't need to get your kids vaccinated, and people are fighting that. They're like, they should get vaccinated. So I agree. Let's just put out the whole idea of kids getting vaccinated.
Let's state what we said. First of all, Dr. Yo is pointing out that long COVID is an endothelial disease, which I completely agree. I think a lot of the problem with the spike protein is something to do with the platelet adhesion and endothelial function, and then the cytokine activation as a result of the endothelial damage. But anyway, neither here nor there. The kid thing, he's
going to be on the show on Friday, so you can talk about that.
I am saying kids should be vaccinated because I want to suppress viral replication. Dr. Kelly is saying that may not be worth the risk for a given individual. But in any case, we are both saying that you need complete informed consent, and that has been thrown to the wind for some reason. And so just educate yourself and make a decision. That's all. In my world, would I vaccinate? Well, by the way, it's apparent to me that Dr. Walensky is not vaccinating her 16-year-old. I don't know if you caught that. She's not letting him go to camp, but then she goes, if you're vaccinated, you can go to camp. She goes, my son's not going to camp.
Right.
What is she telling us? What is she telling us? She has not answered the question yet. Did you vaccinate your 16-year-old?
No, and I am not in the business of telling anybody what to do or not to do. I simply am trying to help people make an informed decision. And I believe that any medical treatment is a risk-benefit calculation. So you need to take into account your individual risk from COVID, understand what it really is, and then weigh that against the potential risks of the treatment.
And also, how much do you want to assume a risk to protect everyone from a potential mutant? That's part of the diathesis here. It's part of the thinking, which is we're all have a responsibility to reduce viral replication. There's a risk reward for you as an individual, but coming down on the side of helping us all may motivate you to take the vaccine. That's up to you. That's up to the individual.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is a very much, so I simply encourage people to not consider, what I don't think people should be considering, is what your friends are doing, what your family's doing, what your coworkers are saying. I don't want people to be coerced or bullied into making a decision to do something that isn't right for them, that isn't based on the right things, because I feel that people will make the wrong decision because they're feeling that they're being shamed, vaccine shamed, essentially,
more
or
importantly,
threatened.
we're telling that this whole conversation has been about the fact that your government and your officials have obscured the facts from you. They've felt you can't handle it. That's what the message has been. We're having these they were having high level conversations about things like the Wuhan lab. You can't handle that, so we're not going to include you in the conversation. Dr. Kelly and I are saying we believe in you. We trust you. We think you can handle information and you'll make a good decision. And that should be job one of the public health officials and us as physicians, to help you make a good decision. Right, Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess the segue I would make there, Drew, is that in the same way that people said, oh, there's no way that the government isn't telling me the truth about where the virus came from, or whether or not masks work, or whether or not social distancing works, or whether or not there was transmission outdoors, or whether or not you could pick it up from tabletops. All of those things that we now know, they were not fully forthcoming about.
Right.
I think you have to consider that you might not have all of the information about the safety of these vaccines. And I'm simply saying that people should make an informed decision.
Yes. It might be obfuscated a little bit. You need to pay attention.
And because we need, in my mind, I personally need more time, more data about the vaccines before I would feel comfortable taking one. I already had COVID, so it's not an issue for me. I don't intend to get vaccinated on the basis of the fact that I already have immunity, but I would need to have more data, more assurance that there are not long-term side effects potentially of the vaccines before, if I hadn't had COVID, that I would feel comfortable getting vaccinated.
And I have had COVID and have had the vaccine and have had my family vaccinated and feel very comfortable with that decision I made. But I have become increasingly aware that the most people don't have access to the data that I had access to, or weren't thinking about the data that I was thinking about. And
well, you didn't have you didn't have the data. You took the Johnson. Which one did you take? I
took Johnson &
Johnson. The next day they took it off the market.
There was increase in data was continuing to come in, but I had enough data that I could make an informed decision.
But fortunately, you turned out okay.
Yes, it turned out okay.
And I feel bad for parents these days, because I can imagine, I was trying to picture myself if my 3 kids were in high school and they were playing football and baseball and they were in the musical and they were ice skating, or they just had sports of any kind that they could be outside and do. I assume they're expecting those parents to have their kids vaccinated because of the teachers, because of the other teams, and if somebody gets sick, then the whole game has to stop. So there's probably so many variables that, that these 16 and over kids have to think about in order to stay in their sports, or their whatever they're doing. So, and the teachers are expecting it, because they want to go have the kids back in school. But it just, like Kelly said, I would want to wait longer. I would feel better waiting until, just tell them, you're going to have to hold off a year on your sports. I think I would make that choice.
Okay. All right.
That would be me, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But I would feel better, because I wouldn't want, it would be Douglas too. He'd probably have a brain hemorrhage or something. I don't know. He had arachnoid cyst when he was a baby. Who knows? I don't know what would happen to him. So, as a mother, it's just such a daunting thing. It's scary.
I agree.
But that's where I agree with Kelly. And I think also maybe instead of having to get the vaccine for the kids, they can continue to wear masks. Maybe that'll make them feel better. I don't know.
Dr. Kelly would argue with you about that one.
But not when they're playing sports, okay?
Yeah.
I know it's so
well. What I would argue is that if if the kids are going back to school and the teachers have been vaccinated,
Yeah.
if the teachers have been vaccinated, then they don't have anything to worry about.
Right.
If there are kids there who aren't vaccinated. If
True.
you believe in the vaccines, then the great news is you don't need to worry about what the people sitting next to you have done. If you're vaccinated, then you don't need to worry about me. So you are protected, right? So you don't need to be worried about whether or not I have gotten vaccinated.
It is so interesting to me that when you look at the graphs of how the pandemic played out during the winter, for instance, when masking and lockdowns were at their most robust, the virus I wore a mask religiously. I got COVID. You know what I mean? And then when you look at what happens when a truly effective measure comes in, meaning the vaccines, it just drops. And when you have something that's really not working very well, that was December, January of 2020, 21, everybody. And so just look at those graphs and think about that. Not saying they did nothing, not saying that. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have been warned. I was an advocate and remain so. But Kelly is just raising issues, particularly now that we have some evidence that our public health officials also had doubts about this. Correct, Kelly? Oh, she lost me again.
Just agree, Kelly.
Yeah,
just shake your head up and down.
Yeah, agree. Exactly. I apologize. Believe me.
I think she's tired too.
I look like I'm in the witness protection program, but I'm actually in a hotel room.
You got to see patients.
And where they clearly do not have very good internet, so I apologize for.
All right, you're going to see patients
But you
tomorrow.
look great, and we love you. We love you.
I start very early. I have an early start tomorrow. I'm seeing patients early.
All right, we'll let you go for that. Thank you for conversing with me and sharing ideas and having a conversation. I mean, this is what medical discourse normally looks like. We disagree, we share ideas, we think about things together, and this is what I wanted to do, and this is why I brought Dr. Victory back, is so we could just have a normal discourse. And since Dr. Fauci said that maybe there is some thought about this virus coming from the lab, it magically allowed more discourse the next day.
Yeah, but we'll get canceled.
People were allowed to talk without being canceled. And
poor Anthony Fauci's going to get canceled. He's
I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. He's under.
He'll live. He'll be okay.
Yeah. But I do appreciate you being here. You go take care of yourself and get up in the morning and have a nice day at work.
Thank you.
And we will see you again soon. Okay.
Take care.
All right. Bye bye, Dr. Kelly Victory.
Thanks. I appreciate the invitation as always, Drew.
You got it, my dear.
She's
looking at the restream.
I think she's on a delay. Bye-bye.
The restream, everybody. I can't see a lot of the things that go by. People are you even reading this? Like, does it look like I'm reading everything that's on the restream? I am not.
We had somebody who was mad, whose husband was a doctor, and she was trying to get her point across, but you guys were in a heavy discourse.
What was the point?
She just disagreed with everything. So,
what,
we haven't had a good troll on Twitter for a while.
What did she disagree with? Because I was on one side and Dr. Kelly was.
I don't know. She just said you were lying and that you were, all the people watching didn't graduate high school, and she was just kind of attacking everybody. And I thought, it's probably better if we just let her burn out.
Okay. All right.
It's okay, honey. I couldn't listen. I didn't block her.
Okay.
But I did tell Tom I was thinking about it.
All right. I was interested in talking to. I'm always interested in addressing
she's gone, I think, now. She was on Periscope.
Dr. Yo has been here the whole time. We're going to see him on Friday morning with Dr. Patterson to talk about COVIDlonghaulers.com. Maybe you want to throw that up, Susan. And we are going to have tomorrow, we're going to do an Ask program. We're going to go live on Clubhouse and do.
Oops, sorry.
There we are.
I got the wrong banner. Okay, you want to talk about Patterson and Yo?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's their adorable faces. Dr. Yo was here earlier. Oh, there he is.
He's still
here.
There. He's still there.
He's a professional troller too, he said. Look.
He is a professional at GIFs. GIFs, whatever you call them.
He said, I'm a professional troller too. Look at that. He halfway through the stream, he goes, boy, Kelly Victory really tells it like it is. We expect you, Dr. Yojendra, to come on and do the same. So we hope to get some
rudely
really
ignore students at university? I don't know what that means. There's a translation problem there. By the way,
we had a lot of really nice responses, and people were listening and they were enjoying the conversation. Don't just read the negative Nancy's, because there were only a couple of them.
All right. Dr. Victory was great, and we appreciate her being here. We appreciate
She's amazing.
Dr. Yo coming in on Friday. Dr. Patterson, give us an update on
tomorrow's
COVID.
an Ask Dr. Drew on Clubhouse. So if you want an invite to Clubhouse, email me at contact@drdrew.com, and we have a lot of people with who can send you an invite so you can ask questions on the show.
Great. That'll be in the Clubhouse, and that's at what time tomorrow? Like late-ish,
3 o'clock.
Right? 3 o'clock tomorrow. We're going to be normal time tomorrow.
Unless you want to do it later. But
and
I was thinking
9 in the morning on Friday with Dr. Yo and Dr. Patterson. I have to get on the road that day.
That's the one. We're waiting for that. That's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah.
You're going to get the real medical scoop here.
Yep. Okay. Thank you all for being attentive on the restream.
Sorry we broke the mic in the middle of it, but also blue mics are amazing. They withstand Drew's abuse and the dog.
Yeah.
And thank you for blue mics. We appreciate it.
All right. It's, make your own decisions. That's the important thing here. We're just trying to give you the information. Dr. Kelly has her point of view, and I have mine. And, I took the vaccine, and I'm happy to have done it. COVID sucks. You don't want to get it if you don't have to. Well, I didn't know that
she got COVID. She just
that
admitted that.
Yeah,
so
I didn't know that either.
We didn't ask her how that went, but that's why she hasn't had the vaccine. She doesn't need it. She's not flying to Greece. And It looks like now flying to Greece, you could show your results for your COVID test and that you've had it. And I think that would work, but I still don't trust that. I'm sorry I put you through taking the vaccine, honey. But
you put me through it. No.
Yeah, it just, at the time, it was like, you have to have a vaccine. It's better because if you don't have a vaccine, you have to go through the Spanish Inquisition.
Yes,
so.
I took it, and that was fine. I have no problem with that.
You just got a black eye.
Just got a weird black eye.
You'll never play the violin again.
Looking for my additive score. Though I still am having some troubling post-COVID kind of stuff.
Yeah, but you learned Greek.
Yes,
it was worth it.
So, some of my memory stuff just isn't quite what it used to be. I don't know. So
Jason said 4,200 dead in the U.S. from the vaccine and over 10,000 in Europe. 50 dead shut down swine flu vaccine, question mark. So, yes, but out of how many millions of people that have taken it? And who knows what their condition was. But if they knew that there was a chance of that, they may have not taken it. We have to learn from our experiences. Like, this is the first time we've had this vaccine, so now we're learning.
I don't quite know what you're saying.
We need to look at this. If you don't think you need the vaccine, your kids don't need the vaccine, don't get it.
Mm-hmm. But it's not that simple. Think about the fact. This is what the case I was trying to make to Dr.
Okay, now that's my opinion.
But listen to my input here. Think about the fact that it's time for us all to be courageous and to step up. You all wore masks on behalf of everyone else and yourself, but you wore it mostly to protect other people from spread. That's mostly the reason you wore masks. Now it's time to take a little risk with a vaccine to reduce the viral replication so, God forbid, another variant doesn't develop that creates another huge epidemic, a brand new pandemic that comes out of this virus where it just mutates and does the same thing all over again. The vaccines don't work. We're not immune to the virus if it mutates sufficiently. That has a finite possibility of happening. That could happen, which is why we need to all step up and take the vaccine to reduce that risk.
Right.
Now, if you don't want to take that, put yourself in that risk, take that risk, and you really feel you have zero probability of catching this thing, zero probability of having a serious case,
getting sick,
and feeling like you wouldn't transmit it to somebody else because you're not interacting with a lot. Okay, but think about the collective here, the collective that has to protect itself against the replication of this virus. Since the vaccine came on board, I'm looking at the CDC's website. This is the daily trends and number of COVID cases. In December, our daily case rate, now from January, case rate was 290,000 a day. The vaccine kicked in, and we are now at 9,000 and dropping rapidly.
Yeah, it works.
8,500 yesterday. Think about that. It's dramatic.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about like when I took Teresa over to get her vaccine. She didn't sign any any consent form. She didn't even know what she just showed up. She doesn't speak English. She just got the shot and left. She goes, I feel nothing. I'm fine.
Right.
She was happy to get it, but
and again,
if something had happened to her, it would have felt terrible.
Well, remember, 20 million people in California have had the vaccine.
It's good.
I've seen a handful of cases.
No, I know. I wish we could find out what happened, what those people, what their pre-existing conditions were, who died, like what they.
I've seen a few cases that were nasty, and it was nothing you could put your finger and point to and say that's the reason they got these things. Most of them were sort of immunological sort of misadventures. All of them got better. So
and look at poor India.
So here we are. All right, let's wrap this up. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. We will be here at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Pacific time, and 9 o'clock with Dr. Yo and Dr. Patterson.
Yeah.
And and we will be gone for a few weeks after that. We'll be in a little bit next week, but we're going to be gone for a while.
Share this with your friends.
We will.
I love Kelly.
We're going to try to do various kinds of Instagram lives and that kind of thing from a distant place. But for now, we'll be back in tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So we'll see you then. I am so grateful for our friends at Blue Microphones. Not only have they completely changed what our show sounds like, they've given me headphones so I can monitor things better. This is the mic for millions of creative people, and now I know why. I'm so grateful for them completely changing the quality of our audio. You'll find Blue mics like Yeti and the Mouse, which we're using here, both in pro studios and home studios, literally all over the world. Their popular Yeti caster is a Blue Yeti microphone, plus a boom arm system that's behind many of your favorite podcasts. I run into them all the time, and now I know why. If you've ever thought about creating your own podcast or YouTube channel, Blue can make you sound and look great. Just visit bluemic.com and click Get Started, and you can start telling your story.